Computer. All right,
Okay.
count me down.
3, 2, 1. Hi, and welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. In today's episode, we're going to discuss how to troubleshoot your training. So if you listened to our previous episode, you might have figured out that we left off some things about pre-workout and training. So after we hit stop recording, Marissa and I were like, we didn't talk about this, and this. So that podcast is here to fill the gaps.
Yeah, I mean, so it was a comprehensive episode on the pre and post workout meals for sure. But you probably, I mean, I don't think this is something that people often consider is all the things we're going to talk about today. So really just filling the gaps that maybe you didn't know that you had. But on a serious note, like literally maybe 20 minutes after we got off the recording, our text thread was something along the lines of, oh my God, we forgot to talk about sodium. Well, that was like definitely me because I love my pre-workout sodium. And then Christina was like, we didn't talk about pre-workout supplements. I was like, oh, but didn't we kind of cover that?
We didn't talk about water.
I was like, didn't we kind of cover that with Doug? And she was like, yeah, but like, not enough. And we were just like, crap, let's do a whole episode on all of the gaps that we need to fill. And we have some other things that we thought of later that would be a nice fit for this episode too. But definitely a couple of things we wanted to just fill the gaps in with pre and post workout nutrition first.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of sheds some light into how our episodes are structured because we are very structured. We like to plan, we have episode outlines for everything, and we like to have everything in a very strategic order. But at the same time, we're not afraid to push out an episode if we think it's super important or if there's a topic that we get from you guys. So again, we're very structured, but we're also very open and trying to do everything we can to help you guys the most.
Structure and flexibility within that structure sounds like something that we preach for training and nutrition, huh?
What? No.
But yeah, seriously. So we were just like, hey, why don't we just make this episode 19 and, push everything back one. And it actually works with the flow of everything that we had scheduled already. So got some good stuff coming up for you guys too, but this is super important. So I guess to start, the first thing that I noticed that we skimped out on that last episode was pre-workout sodium intake or just sodium intake in general and how that might impact your training. So kind of just framing this discussion a little bit better, troubleshooting your training. What we mean by that is, okay, you've got your macros down, you've got your progressive training program, and you've got your pre and post workout nutrition down now too. So you have a lot of your bases covered. But what happens if you suffer with low energy or cramps or lightheadedness, or you hit a plateau in some aspect? We're going to kind of hit on all of those things today. So sodium pre-workout. Sodium is a great thing, and it gets a really bad rep. And most people who are trying to pursue a healthier lifestyle and are just working towards goals, a lot of times we have the misconception that we need to restrict sodium because sodium is bad. It's linked to hypertension. It's linked to cardiovascular disease. But the reality of it is, if you are not obese and you're not already hypertensive or at risk for hypertension or cardiovascular disease, this doesn't really apply to you. And in fact, restricting your sodium to the 2000 or less or 1500 milligrams or less per day can really negatively impact your training performance. On a physiological level, and I won't get too deep into this, sodium helps with muscle contraction. So it is one of the main chemicals, electrolytes that our nerve cells use to transmit signals from our brain to our muscles to tell them, hey, you need to contract because there's a load in your hand or a barbell on your back. Your brain is telling your muscles through your nerves with sodium how to do this. And so if you don't have enough sodium in your system overall, muscle contraction can be impaired or just suboptimal. And so when it comes to resistance training, when you're training really hard for 45 minutes to an hour per day, you want to make sure that you have enough sodium across the whole day, but especially in that pre-workout meal.
Yeah. So there are, again, I think like Marissa was saying, that there's this preconceived notion that sodium is bad and you should keep it around that 1500, 2000 milligram or 2 milligrams, 2000 milligrams. And I had a client who said the same thing, that they had always heard that this is what they should keep their sodium under because they have hypertension in the family. But Marissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that there are a lot of studies on sodium and hypertension, but there's a short-term effect with sodium, but they haven't really been able to prove a long-term effect of high sodium on hypertension.
I think that I don't know about acute and chronic, but I will say that a lot of the research done on sodium and hypertension and cardiovascular disease is correlational, meaning they're relating like rough average intakes of, for example, the American population to prevalence of obesity. So it's kind of that whole correlation does not equal causation thing, where in some people, if you are predisposed to hypertension, it could be partially causation, but there's a number of factors that contribute to hypertension and cardiovascular disease. Overall, just larger portion sizes in our community and society now, higher sodium meals in the sense that things are highly processed, and we're having larger portions of processed fast food. And then also weight gain and obesity contributes to our inability to actually use sodium properly and for what it needs to be used for. And inactivity, if we're not working out or being active, then there's no reason for that sodium in excess to be there, right? And so I think just the correlation, yes, there is a higher sodium intake in hypertensive individuals, people with or predisposed to cardiovascular disease, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the more sodium that you eat, the more you are going to, increase your risk of mortality or something like that. If you are a healthy weight individual who is training hard, eating right, if all of those things are in line, sodium actually becomes your best friend, because there's a lot of research in athletes that show that athletes have a much higher sodium intake on average, and that helps with their performance. And so typically, and I'm not going to say this is what everyone should do, and you should obviously consult with your doctor or physician first if you are concerned about tendencies in your genetics and your family. However, usually the 2000 milligram threshold does not cut it for most people who are resistance training really hard. And I find that my clients feel better and perform better when they're around or above 3000 milligrams per day. I personally have gone up to, in my 2018 prep, when I was doing tons of cardio, drinking tons of water because I was sweating a lot, and training for an hour to an hour and a half per day, I needed close to 8,000 to 10,000 milligrams of sodium per day to just not get lightheaded, not get dizzy, and actually be able to perform. And that was my baseline at the time. Right now, probably not quite there, but I do love my salt.
Yeah, so I think, again, this kind of goes back to the philosophy that Marissa and I have with tracking your food intake is, do you have to track forever? No, but it's a really good idea to track things like sodium every now and then to get a baseline and to establish what your normal is. So if you know that in order to reach your sodium goals, you need to have some sodium pre-workout or you need to salt your meals, it's not something that you have to track all the time, but it is something to get an idea of what your normal looks like or what you need to do to alter your foods to get a good idea of your sodium intake. But yes, sodium is super important, and it's really important for your performance in the gym. And so one of the things also that we have listed is it does help with cramps and lightheadedness, but it also helps with your pumps in the gym as well, and like getting vascular in the gym. So sometimes it is nice to kind of see your muscles working when you're working out and to be able to see that vascularity. If you're meatheads like Marissa and I, we love to see it. So sodium does help with that as well.
Yeah, and not only that, but okay, so sodium preventing cramps. This is essentially if you feel like really, really difficult muscle cramps, not just like your muscles burning or aching, but you actually cramp to the point where you cannot move that muscle. A Charlie horse in the middle of the night, for example, unless you are having a chronic problem with those, sometimes electrolyte balance can be the culprit of those. And just, kind of getting to, the midpoint of your set and just feeling that muscle like really cramp up and you're not able to continue. That could be remedied by sodium, could also be remedied by stretching out and not being super tight. But and then lightheadedness, personally, I struggle with this. So to kind of get into the weeds a little bit, I have very naturally low blood pressure, and this could be genetic, and this could be just from being an athlete growing up. I have a natural lower resting blood pressure. So what that means is that basically when I do heavy sets of, I don't know, typically lower body movements, leg press, squat, split squat, hip thrust. And I, for example, maybe it's a hip thrust and I'm kind of, my back's on the bench, kind of in a laying position. If I get up too fast after that set, or, for example, if you wake up in the morning and you get up really quickly and you start to get lightheaded or dizzy and you need to sit back down, that is because the blood in your body is not catching up to your head quite quick enough. And so what's happening when you train is you're shunting blood from everywhere in your body to primarily the muscles that you're working. So if you're doing a heavy lower body day, a lot of the blood in your body is going to be preferentially distributed to your legs. So what happens is if you get up too quickly after a really heavy set, there's not going to be that much blood in your head. And that could lead to lightheadedness or dizziness when you stand up. So if you are not taking care of your sodium intake, this can be exacerbated. This can be a little bit amplified, and you might get more lightheaded in between sets, or even just in general throughout your workout. And so increasing your sodium intake does acutely increase your blood pressure, because, that's how hypertension over the long term does happen. But acutely, if you have a dose of sodium, blood pressure goes up. It allows you to not experience that really rapid drop in blood pressure in your head after those sets, or just brings that effect down. Personally, even with all the sodium that I consume, I still kind of get a little lightheaded when I'm really pushing it. And that's something normal that I expect and know how to deal with. Just get up a little bit slower after your set, or sit there for a second, breathe, allow the blood to distribute back to where it needs to be, and then get up. Usually it's fine, but that is one thing that sodium can really, really benefit.
So the next thing to talk about is pre-workout supplements. So again, we talked about this in episode 17 with Doug Miller, the CEO of Core Nutritionals. So obviously Marissa and we work with Core, and Core products are our supplements of choice when it comes to pre-workout. So there are a couple different options that we utilize, which are stim and non-stim, so stimulants. And the difference is the caffeine primarily. And so stim is going to have caffeine intake, and non-stim is going to not have any caffeine. And so a lot of this comes down to a personal preference, personal choice, and most likely also the time that you're going to lift. So if you're going to lift in the evening, maybe even afternoon, you might want to think about switching to a non-stim, because caffeine has a long effect in the body. So even if you have caffeine at like maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon, there's still some, like if you're very sensitive to caffeine, there's a probability that it's going to affect you later at night when you're trying to go to sleep, or your sleep quality overall. So stim, non-stim, that's a personal preference. Sometimes you can even mix the two. Sometimes that's what we do. We do Fury and Pump. So Pump is the non-stim and Fury is the stim. So you can do a little bit of that combination. And again, like we always say, you can play around and try to find the best kind of pre-workout cocktail that works best for you and how you feel in the gym and what your training sessions are like.
Yes. And speaking of pre-workout cocktails, to bring it back a little bit to sodium as well, there are a lot of bodybuilders and kind of like the old school bodybuilder mentality, and a lot of people that work for Core or affiliated with Core. I've seen them put salt in their pre-workout cocktail, and like that's how they get their pre-workout sodium. Personally, I've never tried that because that kind of sounds gross to me. But just
I
you've
do
done it?
that. I do it.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you
Hmm.
taste it?
I mean, a little bit, but if you just kind of like swig it down real fast, not really. It's just,
Mm.
I think it's just a personal preference. So the other thing I've done is, this is so gross. I've like dry scooped salt. Like if I am, because I think part of it is like if I'm coming from work or something, I have salt in my gym bag. So I'm not always able to have salt with my meals. So sometimes I'll just do that, and it's super easy. You don't really taste it at all. You get like kind of like residual kind of effect, but it's really not bad,
Yeah.
also just because you and I are crazy. Like, so to let you guys know how much Marissa and I love salt, other than her telling you that she got so much in her 2018 prep, but Marissa and I dropped her off at the Albuquerque airport, which ironically enough, I'm in Albuquerque right now, but we went out to a Mexican restaurant and we got chips for the table. And Marissa and I literally, we salted the chips, but then like I take it a step further and I will salt my individual chips before I eat them. Like that's how much I love salt.
Oh my gosh. I pretty much do the
So
same
just want
thing
to put that
with,
in. Yeah.
yeah, with a lot of things, especially like steak or like meats. I'll like sprinkle salt before each bite.
Mm-hmm.
It's really bad. I saw this one reel. I think either you sent it to me or Aaron sent it to me or I sent it to him, but it was a reel of like a guy filming his girlfriend at a bunch of different restaurants. And he was like, my girlfriend is literally a psychopath. And like, she was just salting everything that she was eating, like before she ate it. And I was like, wow, this is literally me. But,
Yeah, I do. I do a salt pile, but
yeah. Yeah. I've done a salt pile as well. Like if I have something that I just want to dip in it, it's really bad.
hmm yeah,
But it's not really
yep,
bad because it helps with our pumps.
yes, yes, and we're meatheads, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah. So I do want to kind of add on to that. You don't have to be as crazy as we are. A couple of other applications that we use for getting in sodium pre-workout. Personally, I right now what I do is I just eat a couple of pickles before I go train. That's usually along with my pre-workout meal. Christina hates pickles. She always thinks it's disgusting. She's making a face right now if you're not watching on YouTube. But that is one way if you do like pickles or pickled vegetables. And then also I have a client who has really, really low resting blood pressure, and we've worked with this, and she honestly, like her homeostasis is 5 to 7,000 milligrams per day. And if she's not there, she starts to feel really lethargic and her recovery is not there. It's crazy. But she has found that ordering the Gatorade Zero packet, like large packs on Amazon, and just like throwing those in her water and her gallon all day long tends to do enough for her, but she always keeps like emergency salt packets in her gym bag as well. So, you know, those are some things. Gatorade, Powerade, Zeros, those don't have quite as much sodium as you would think, but they do have some. So if you just need a little bit of a boost, those are great as well.
Yeah. The other thing I'll do is I actually, and I thought, I can't remember who I first saw this from, and I thought it was super gross until I actually tried it. But I put salt in my oatmeal and I like
Really?
pink salt. Yes, it's again, it sounds gross. And I was very skeptical and I tried it and I love it. And
Hmm.
now currently oatmeal without salt tastes weird to me.
Is that oatmeal with salt with like a protein powder or like other flavoring
Yeah.
too? So you
Yeah.
get like the
So
sweet and salty.
So normally what I do is, again, I'm super weird when it comes to my oats. So I always do like a half and half because I don't like doing a full scoop of protein powder in my oats because I feel like the flavor is like very overwhelming. So
Mhm.
what I was doing like a half scoop of like, I don't know, cinnamon bun or something like that, vanilla. And then I would do a half a scoop of the vegan because I feel like the vegan kind of like mellows it out a tiny bit, but I'm still getting the benefits of protein in the oatmeal. And then my favorite is like banana and peanut butter. And so having that little bit of salt on top is really, really good.
Okay, I get that with like the peanut butter, especially because that's like a little salty as well. I could
Mm-hmm.
see myself definitely sprinkling
Mm-hmm.
some salt on that. on that combo for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel you there. But to
Try
bring it back
Let
to
us know if you guys try it.
pre-workout supplements. We were on a little tangent there, but you were saying
Mm-hmm.
about caffeine and balancing stimulant versus non-stimulant pre-workout supplements, depending on what time you train. So personally, I train around 5:30 p.m. So I do my best to not use stimulants as much as possible. It can be really hard when my calories aren't super high. Like right now I'm dieting. So sometimes I do need a little bit more of an edge, but what I'll typically do, like you said, is do a mix of both. So I'll have pump, I'll do my normal serving, full scoop of that, and then I'll do like a sprinkle or like a quarter, third, or half scoop of the stimulant-based pre-workout Fury. And typically just that little, like it might even just be a placebo effect of like getting a little bit of caffeine in my system really tends to help. What you were saying about how caffeine stays in your system. So this is important for troubleshooting your training. If you train late and then you get shitty sleep, because your recovery happens when you're sleeping. So if you are not mindful of this and you're downing 200, 300, 400 milligrams of caffeine before you go work out at 6, 7 p.m., that's a problem. You might be able to fall asleep just fine. I have plenty of people who tell me, oh yeah, well, I fall asleep just fine. I sleep through the night. Yes, but the quality of your sleep is inhibited by the caffeine that stays in your system. And the half-life of caffeine is roughly 5 hours. And the half-life is essentially how long it takes for 50% of whatever you ingested to be out of your system. So that's only 50% 5 hours later at 10 p.m. if you train at 5 from whatever you took. And then the rest is still in your system throughout the night, inhibiting the quality of your sleep. And then you wake up feeling less well rested. And then what happens? You need more caffeine the next day. And then you perpetuate that cycle. And then all of a sudden you're dependent on caffeine to even get yourself to the gym, and you're getting crappy sleep and you have no idea how to fix it. So the best thing that we can say here is be mindful of that caffeine intake, know the dosage that you're taking, and make sure you are timing it and cutting it off at a time that will be productive for you to be able to get good quality sleep. Because the more well rested that you are, the less you're going to need stimulants. So it's a perpetuating cycle in one direction or the other, and you can take it either way.
Yeah. So like Marissa was saying, is be aware of the caffeine intake and the dosing that is in your supplement products. That's really, really big, because I was working with a supplement company prior to Core, and I took a full scoop, which you should never do with a brand new pre-workout, because I had no idea what the dosing was. And it was like 400 milligrams for one scoop. And so that was like, I was tripping on pre-workout at the gym. So be very, very aware. And then the other thing, fun little story too. So sometimes it's something that you don't even expect caffeine to be in. You still want to double check your supplements. So I
You
was
stole my
taking
story.
aminos, and I was okay. Well, I was taking aminos and I didn't think anything of it. And again, Core was a brand new company to me, and I had used their products before, but they had Core, and I can't remember why I ended up getting Core ABCD instead of ABC. And so I was like just doing my normal, like I'd have like half a scoop to a scoop of aminos in my big water bottle. And I would do it all throughout the day. And how did you even figure it out?
Well, so the products are, so ABCs are 100 scoop tubs. So a lot of times the price can really get to people. It's like, oh, it's like $55, $60 for this whole tub of 100 scoops. ABC is BCAAs, beta alanine, and citrulline. There's no stimulants in that. And that stands for aminos, beta alanine, citrulline. ABCD has the same ABC, and then D stands for drive, which is caffeine. And it comes in only a smaller tub. So a lot of times people will buy that because they're like, oh, well, I want to try the flavor, or I just don't want to spend that much money or whatever. So that's probably like where that comes from, right? So they're two separate products. Just one is the BCA combination with caffeine, so ABCD. So Christina had that, and she's chugging this shit like 24/7. And so it was like right before bed one night, and I realized that you had just put a scoop of ABCD. This is when we visited her over winter time. But she had put it in her shaker at like 9 or 10 p.m. And I just look at her and I'm like, I'm not going to tell her right now because she's about to go to bed and she probably has no idea. So I'm not going to have her self-sabotage her sleep, but I'm going to tell her tomorrow. So she goes to bed and I tell my boyfriend, I'm like, oh my God, I don't think she knows. I don't think she read the label. And so it was just so funny because like you and I, Christina, have talked about how we're like, hey, like we tell our clients all the time, read the damn label, right? Like,
and here I am just scooping like.
just
Yeah,
scooping.
so it was so funny. The next morning you were like, hey, there's caffeine in that. And I was like, oh.
I was like, how did you sleep, Christina?
Yeah, I'm fine. Why?
So yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So lesson learned, read the label, always check, even if you think you know what's in something, just make sure to go over the label. Typically caffeine will be in a product in the form of caffeine or caffeine anhydrous. Other stimulants that you should be aware of that can increase your heart rate or just increase your awareness overall can be like green coffee extract, green tea extract. Yohimbine is another one that can actually increase like anxiety levels in people who are predisposed and is also a stimulant. So keep an eye out for those, but especially caffeine or caffeine anhydrous.
Yeah. And then obviously, of course, to make sure that you're aware of your caffeine intake. So how much coffee you have in the morning, if you're having 1, 2 cups, 3 cups throughout the day, how much, if you have any energy drinks, and then what your pre-workout kind of concoction, what that all consists of as well. And of course, like I mentioned, any other products that you might take throughout the day. So just to be aware of that, because your caffeine intake can really add up quickly over time. And so you can build up a tolerance to caffeine intake, which is why that some people will take a pre-workout supplement and they start off with a quarter scoop and then it's half and then it's a full scoop, and then the next thing it's like they can't feel anything, so they're having to take 2 or 3 scoops. And so it is a good idea to just be aware of your caffeine intake. And also, if you ever need to go on a little what's the word that I'm looking for, detox, kind of caffeine detox
Cleanse.
and to slowly taper your intake over time, yeah, like a caffeine cleanse. So doing a detox, if you can go cold turkey, go for it. But a lot of people do get headaches using that method, but it is a lot quicker. But what you can do is start just by cutting your intake in half, and then just kind of trickle down over time. And maybe I can't remember, I think it was in 2018. I did the whole month of December. I did no caffeine just because I wanted to kind of start my prep very fresh, because I knew I was going to get to a point where I was utilizing a high amount of caffeine intake just to kind of function throughout the day. Because when you're in prep, it's hard. It's hard to do life. So just kind of a little tangent on that.
Oh yeah, no, that's super important. And just being mindful of your total intake, adding that up throughout the day. So for reference, a cup of coffee is roughly like 80 to 100 milligrams if you're, depending on how strong you're making it. And then obviously reading the labels on your pre-workouts. Typically, I would say, and this kind of differs from the general population, because a lot of us lifters out here, we love to be stim junkies. We love energy drinks. We love all of our coffee and our caffeine. So typically the daily intake tends to be a little higher in this population compared to the general population. But I would say probably at a max 600 milligrams per day is probably a top end range of like, okay, it's starting to get to be a lot if you're exceeding that. And so I know Doug, that we had on for episode 17, he's talked about this numerous times. He's been taking exactly 600 milligrams per day every day for the past like 15 years. And that's just that's what works for him. And that is what he's adapted to, and it helps him. So he splits that up between his energy drinks or his pre-workouts or his coffee or whatever, but he never allows himself to exceed that. Personally, I find that a phasic approach, like you said, Christina, doing less before you have a really intensive phase of your life. For me, the semester is when I get much, much more reliant on coffee during the mornings and the early afternoons. And sometimes I still need a little bit of something for my training sessions in the evenings. But during winter break, summer break, that's when I really, really dial it back. And I'm really having like 1 or 2 cups of coffee per day. And that's it. And it resensitizes me to all of it. So that can really help. I think one more thing I will say on not supplements, stimulants, is coffee can be a great substitute for a pre-workout. If you prefer coffee, there's nothing wrong with that. And there used to be research that people tended to agree on that coffee was not as good as pre-workout type caffeine because it has other things in it that like limit the digestibility or something like that. And they basically concluded, they being exercise scientists, concluded that coffee was not effective as a pre-workout stimulant. And then in the past, like I believe it was 5 or 10 years, they basically refuted that. More research came out and said there's really no difference if you equate the caffeine from coffee to pre-workout. Typically, it's just, if you have 1 cup of coffee, that's just less caffeine overall. But if you are more sensitive to caffeine and you love coffee, that's a great option. You can do coffee pre-workout. One thing to be mindful of, though, is coffee does dehydrate you. It is a diuretic. So if you're not well hydrated, that can kind of interfere with your pump and your blood flow during your training.
Well, I was going to say, doesn't caffeine restrict blood flow a little bit?
Yes. So that's why a lot of multi-ingredient pre-workout products have blood flow enhancers and pump agents so that it can counteract and override that effect.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say is if you don't need caffeine before your workouts, you don't need to take a pre-workout supplement. So it's all just depends on how you feel your best in your training sessions, because that's the whole point of having a pre-workout supplement, is that you're trying to get the most out of your training sessions and your output and your intensity. So again, don't be afraid to play around with different things to kind of find the right pre-workout concoction that works best for you.
Yeah. And there's always a time frame where you might not need it and you can perform just fine. What we would suggest is just don't get reliant on it to have a good training session. I think it's important to kind of save those pre-workouts for those heavy days, those leg days, those days where you really, really need it. But I did want to also touch on one more kind of pre-workout supplement-ish that people tend to use as a pre-workout. So a lot of times people will use stimulant-based fat burners as a pre-workout supplement or as a substitute for it. So stimulant-based fat burners are just fat burners that have caffeine or yohimbe in them to help increase your body temperature, heart rate, and overall output. And that's one of the functions of a fat burner. A lot of the cheap ones are basically just caffeine, and they'll just stim you up and expect that to kind of increase your output. But high quality ones have caffeine and other ingredients. You absolutely can use fat burners as a pre-workout supplement, but depending on what you use, they may lack the other ingredients that we talked about. So like pump enhancing agents, things that are going to increase blood flow or mental focus. Depending on the fat burner that you use, pay attention to that, because if you notice that you're doing a fat burner instead of an actual pre-workout product, you might notice that maybe you don't get quite as good of a mind muscle connection, a pump, or maybe you're distracted or you're just too hyped up on stims. That might be a time to look at the label and say, okay, well, what is this product actually supposed to be doing for me? And how might a actual pre-workout product, stimulant or non-stimulant, benefit me more? And another thing you can do is stack a fat burner with a non-stimulant pre-workout to kind of get the best of those two effects. That's just going to be more on your wallet though.
Yeah. So if you are taking a fat burner, of course, be aware of if there is caffeine or not, because if you are taking your fat burners at night, again, like Marissa was saying, it's going to affect your sleep quality. So just be very aware of that. And so there are some companies that will have like regular fat burners, and then they'll have a nighttime fat burner. So, or like Core, how they have a non-stim fat burner. So again, just to be very aware. And if you ever have questions about any of the Core products, always feel free to reach out to me and Marissa. We'll help you out. We'll help kind of figure out what stack is best for you and your goals. Or if you're unsure of something or why this supplement has this ingredient and not this, we're always here to help.
Yeah, or just any product. Like, let's go broad here. If you're not sure about something, just send us a picture of the label, please. Like, take a look at the label. If you don't know what the ingredients are, we can help you break that down. Also, examine.com is a great resource. You just type in the name of the ingredient and you get a full rundown on what the dosing should be and what it's supposed to do for you and warnings and that sort of thing. So, I think that pretty much covers stimulants, pre-workouts. I think we really did that justice. So I'm glad it wasn't a part of episode 18 because then it would have been a 2-hour episode.
Yeah, so maybe it was a good thing that we did that. We
Yeah.
left it out on purpose. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. Let's just let's have Shane just erase the whole intro and we'll just say that we did this all intentionally. Yep.
Yes. Yep. All right, number 4.
Yeah.
Logging your training.
Yeah. So when you are training, you want to make sure that you're progressing. And we did really touch on this on the programming and progression, but we just wanted to go more into depth on how to log your training and how to keep mind of how to progress in every session.
Yeah. So there are a couple different ways that you can log your training. So I think that Marissa and I are very old school and we love having a pen and paper notebook and we like writing down all of our lists, writing down what the reps, the sets, the weights that we use. And then there are people who prefer everything being on an app or being on their phone. Then maybe they find it to be a little bit more organized because sometimes I will forget my notebook or I don't know, sometimes I'll just like not spur the moment, but I'll just find a time in my day that I can get in a lift and maybe I just don't have it. And you always have your phone. So it's just a personal preference, but I just prefer writing things down. So I'm not on my phone as much throughout my training sessions and I can really concentrate because sometimes I feel like if I'm on my phone during my training session, sometimes my rest times can get up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and before I know it, I've spent 2 hours in the gym. So I feel like it's just a nice way to really focus and have more intention throughout your workout.
I've had that same problem, and that is the reason why I actually went back to writing things down. I love writing things down in general. Like I take all of my school notes on notebooks. I write literally everything. I have written planners instead of like Google Calendar or something like that. However, so for me, I spent probably like a year and a half writing in all my training on the notes app on my phone. And I just like, even if I was following a program, I just felt like it was not, it was easy because I could copy and paste the workout from the week prior and have all the weights and reps that I did there so I could know how to progress. But at the same time, it's like you see a message pop down, you see notifications. It's so distracting. And so what I've been doing, especially ever since I started training at Core HQ, I don't have to worry about music because Aaron takes care of that. And we just connect to the big speaker and he likes to DJ and I hate to DJ. So I just listen to whatever is being played, which is great. I put my phone face down and I'm just writing in my training and carrying my notebook around. So if you probably don't have a private facility to train at, just put your phone in your gym bag or, in your pocket or something and let that be. And I really like it. It's helped a lot. Pretty much the only thing I use my phone for is to film a set or two, get something on for my Instagram story, because that I get some messages from people saying like, this motivates me or this helps me. It's fun to see your progression. So I do try to do that. I don't love filming inherently, but that's pretty much exclusively how I'll use my phone. But I'm not perfect either. So like there are definitely days where I'll be tempted. I'll go check my messages in between sets if I know I have a longer rest period. And, so the trade-off is there. But I do have clients who, and a lot of their programming is on Google Sheets or Excel. So they might have the Excel app or they might have the Google Sheets app, and they might be logging their training directly in there. So for those clients, that's easier for them because they can see it. And what I do for them there is I remind them of what they did the previous week on that log. So they see, hey, I did this last week. I know how to progress. I know what RPE I'm targeting. And so they can just plug and chug essentially with their training on the Excel app. And a lot of them really like that and prefer it to, say, if I put their training program on a Word document and said, use a notebook, right? So it really depends on the person and how you function best and how prone you are to distraction.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I again, Marissa and I, very, very similar, but I have a planner as well that I like to write everything out. I just prefer, I don't know. I think I'm old school because I also think that there's also that like, there's a different connection that you get with your brain from writing things down than typing. So I like that, especially when it comes to like note taking or writing down my to-do list. But when it comes to my notebook for training, I also write little reminders from the previous week. So one of the things that I've started to do now is because I train in a lot of different gyms, which is not the best because I'm using different machines, I'm using different weight stacks, and sometimes I'll go and I'll be like, how the heck did I do this weight last week or 2 weeks ago? And it's because I was at a different gym, and sometimes the weights are a little bit different. So I've started writing like at home or at any time or at crunch. So I know where the lift occurred. And so I have a much better understanding of what weight I should be using for this week.
Oh, yes, that is a really good point. And before I get into that, because I think that that is something we probably should have had on this outline, but I'm really glad you brought it up. I'll do the same thing at Core HQ, at One Life Fitness, at Golds, with Aaron, with my friend, with this person, whoever I'm training with. I also write down the time that I take in the gym. So I know, am I putzing around too much? Am I taking too much time in between sets? And so staying accountable to writing down the times shows me from week to week to week, I'm consistent with how long I'm spending on a particular workout. In addition, kind of like setups or the type of machine. So if I have, for example, say a seated cable row for an exercise. If I go to one gym versus another, this could be, maybe they don't have a seated cable row available when I go to a different gym. So I use a seated row machine instead. So I note that difference. Or, for example, a different machine brand. So if I go to a different gym, my leg extension might not be a Life Fitness leg extension. It might be a Cybex leg extension. So that point, Christina, is huge. Every different brand is going to feel starkly different. Typically, the carryover from one machine to the next is not going to be the exact same. One conversation I had with some clients recently was the carryover from a barbell hip thrust to the Nautilus hip thrust machine with the belt that you snap in. And depending on how you feel with that apparatus, the carryover might or might not be the same because, the machine might not be exactly 45 pounds of weight. And even so, the distribution is different. The pulleys on certain cable machines are going to be different. The cams on different machines are going to be very different. So when you go from gym to gym to gym, like you said, it's not like super ideal to make measurable progress because you might be jumping around in weight, just trying to figure out where your actual correct weight is. So I have clients say this all the time. They're like, oh, I couldn't do my lat pull down with 70 pounds at all. Like, even though I did it with 70 pounds last week, no problem. I'm like, well, it was probably a different machine. It was probably just a completely different setup. And you probably should have decreased the weight instead of trying to, stick to this exact weight because that's what you did. If you know that you're in a different context, it's time to adjust and adapt.
Yeah. And going off of that, when Marissa was saying that she writes down who she's training with, one of the things that I've done too is like my most recent example was bench press. And so I normally work out by myself. So I don't have someone who can spot me. I don't have someone who can really help me, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I like someone who can help me with a lift off or can help me if I'm, struggling on that last rep. Because if I'm by myself, I'm probably going to stop when I know I can stop with that. And I'm not going to push it and see, oh, can I get this last rep? Because
Yeah.
I don't want to fail on an exercise and then be stuck with a bar on my chest and having to dump the weights. So I've also notated in my notes if I had a lift off or if I had someone who spotted me. So I think I wrote, right now, Marissa has me doing like 4x4 to 6 for barbell bench press. And I wrote down like 4 with spot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I knew that I was able to get that fourth, but it was because I had someone there with me. So if the next time I go in, if I had just written 4 and I could only get 3, I might be like, well, what the heck? I'm not as strong as I was before, but I know, hey, I had someone helping me on that last rep.
Yeah, that's super important. So just making different notes like that. Other things I'll do too is like just saying, I was really tired today, and I'll write like really just struggling to get my energy up or something like that, or long work day. And then another thing is basically like how I set up a machine. So like for example, on a pec deck fly, I like to have the seat on the 4th level down. And, depending on the machine, it might be numbered, or it might just be like a number of pegs to adjust the seat. And you find what works best for you. But what if you forget the next week and then you have to figure it out all again? But if you make that note, then it's like, oh, okay, I know exactly how to set it up to be in the exact same situation that I was last week to progress. So yeah, lots of notes, just paying attention to things and really just being mindful of keeping account of them can be really helpful to progress in your training and get through like slumps like that.
Yeah. So hopefully when you're listening to this, you're not thinking like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stuff to keep track of, or I don't know how I'm going to be able to focus on my workout and focus on all this stuff. Like we always talk about, like start with a good foundation. So if you just need to get in the habit of tracking your lifts and tracking your RPE, then go ahead and just start with that. And then progress over time once that is very normal to you and it feels easy and it's just part of your routine to start doing notes, where you're working at, maybe your settings, but just to kind of go with things over time and not to overwhelm yourself in the gym right off the bat.
Oh yeah, and kind of too just like write things down as they come to you in your head and don't really worry about much else. But like if you, for example, struggle to find a nice setup with a particular machine and you think, oh, this would probably be good if I like noted this for next time because I took so long to figure it out, then like that's a good time to do that. Or if you're traveling, like, just write like, oh, was traveling here, as it comes to you, instead of thinking like, oh, Christina Marissa said focus on this and this and this. Just as things pop up in your head, if you think it's worth noting, it probably is. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
So I think we've kind of finalized that area.
Mm-hmm. So next thing we have up on here is really, really simple, is just breathing during your lifting. Not a lot of people, I think, when they start out with lifting, understand that you can breathe to actually produce more force, or you can breathe in a disadvantaged way where you're kind of cutting yourself short. So the biggest thing is you want to inhale on the eccentric. So that is the stretching of the muscle, or the typically like the downward or lengthening portion of the movement. And then you want to breathe out during the concentric. So when you're contracting the muscle and when you're actually doing the work to push or pull something. So on a wide grip lat pull down, this might look like breathing in on as the handle is on its way up and you're stretching out your lats. And on a concentric for that, you'd breathe out as you pull down, because that is the movement that you're trying to do, is the pull down. So you'll breathe out when you're trying to produce that force. On a chest press, you are going to probably breathe in as the dumbbell or the barbell comes down towards your chest, breathe out as you are pushing it up and trying to produce that force. One more thing with breathing is the Valsalva maneuver. You may or may not hear about this as you go about your journey. This is essentially a technique for compound movements like the squat or deadlift or even bench press, where you hold your breath through most or all of the concentric, so the contraction of your muscle. So for example, if I am doing a barbell squat, I might breathe in and hold it as I start to descend from the top of the squat, or even before you start the squat, I might breathe in, hold, and then start to descend. And then I'm going to use that pressure. It's essentially increasing the pressure in your abdomen by holding your breath, to kind of hold that throughout the rep and then breathe out once I finish the rep and get back up to the top. So this is something that can affect blood pressure much more drastically, especially with heavy loads. So sodium is important here, and just being mindful of, lightheadedness post set is very important. It can be dangerous if you're not experienced with it. So, just making sure that you are trying it out with supervision or with someone with you or someone more experienced. But that is a maneuver that can allow you to produce more force and more pressure in your abdomen, intra-abdominal pressure when you're lifting big weight. And that is pretty much all I have for that.
Yeah, squatting, that sometimes you'll see them kind of do that inhale and you see their mouth is still full of air and they're filling their belly. And so it's kind of like that squat belly where it's not very attractive in the sense that you don't really care what you look like when you're squatting. Like you're not trying to keep like a flat stomach or keep everything in. You're actually doing the complete opposite. You're filling your belly. Just pay attention, or if you ever watch like Olympic lifters, they'll do kind of the same thing. And so a lot of them will wear belts, and so they're pushing their belly against their belt to kind of brace themselves for the lift.
Yeah. And I try to show this in my Instagram stories if I'm doing a big squat pattern or an RDL. And I try to get it from the side. I don't like posting it because it literally will look like I'm kind of pregnant. But like that is what it should look like, is you should breathe directly into your stomach and really be bracing through your stomach. And it should look like you're puffing out your stomach. And if you train in the evening like I do, you probably have 2 or 3 or 4 meals in your system already. And it's just not going to look the cutest. But general rule of thumb, if you are able to hold everything in together and suck in while you're training, you're probably doing yourself and your strength a disservice. So don't follow the Instagram models for that one, because you could really be benefiting from your training if you start to really brace and breathe into your stomach and use that for force.
So another thing that I thought of that's not really connected with breathing, but one of the things I've seen with a lot of female lifters is we're kind of at a disadvantage for some of the benches and some of the machines, is we're really short. So sometimes our feet don't always hit the ground. But if you are in a position to firmly plant your feet on the ground, that can also help with your lifts as well. So pay attention, especially during bench. If you're doing any sort of pressing movement, to really pay attention and almost like try to push through your feet, even though you were like, well, what the heck? Like I'm using my shoulders, or like, why would my feet come into play? But that can also help just really brace yourself.
Oh, yes. So that's called the 5-point contact method. So like if you're on a bench, seated or laying down or something like that, you're going to want both your feet and then your shoulder blades and your butt and your head all on the bench. And you can push out from the floor. You can push against the bench. Like all of this allows you to produce more force. So in actually like personal training certifications, they teach the 5-point contact for bench exercises and overhead exercises, that sort of thing. And that again can really help with force production. So I think that was a really good add-on.
Yeah. So the other thing to focus on is your nutrition fueling your training. So we did talk about this a lot in the most recent episode, but there are a lot of things to consider while you are training.
I think that we kind of want to do this on a higher level. So we went into the nitty gritty of how to structure those pre and post workout meals. So this is in the context of you're doing all of that, but what about your total daily intake, right? And so the main takeaways from this is if you're in a calorie deficit, the goal, it depends a lot on your experience level and how big that deficit is. But there will come a point if you are in a weight loss phase where the goal should no longer be gaining a ton of strength. The margin of strength that you might gain from session to session might be smaller. And at a certain point, if you do get lean enough or lose enough weight, you may need to start focusing on body weight relative PRs. So for example, if you weigh 200 pounds and you can do squats with 250 pounds, but you lose 50 pounds and now you weigh 150 and you're able to do squats with 200 pounds, but that's the most you've ever done at that body weight, that's something to focus on because that's a relative to your body weight PR, personal record. But you might not be able to beat your all-time best when you're at your heaviest, because the heavier you are, the more mass you have to move other mass. So focusing on maintenance of strength and maintenance of relative strength when you're in a deficit when your calories are higher, either at maintenance or in a surplus, you should absolutely expect to see increases in your progress in the gym on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis, depending on how experienced you are. And if you are eating enough consistently, getting stronger most likely will not be an issue, as long as you're taking care of also sodium, sleep, caffeine, balance, all those things that we mentioned. But if your technique is there, and you're eating enough, you should be able to get stronger pretty reliably with maintenance calories or a slight surplus. And then the bigger the surplus gets, typically there's a point of diminished returns. But if you increase the surplus a lot and you're really well fueled for your training, for example, a lot of times we have this, I know I'd have this mindset of like, if I do go off track and I do go overboard, say have an extra cookie or two, I know my session the next day is going to be really good because I just have that extra fuel sitting there. So if you do that chronically, like you might make larger increases in your strength gains, but pay attention to if they're relative strength gains or if you're just adding more and more body fat, more and more weight. If you just do that, yeah, you're going to have more mass, you're going to hit more PRs. A lot of times that is the way to break a strength plateau, is if you get yourself into such a large surplus that you are gaining weight, that might break you past a strength plateau. But for a lot of people, especially women, there tends to be a point of diminished returns where it's just not worth it to gain extra weight to get that much stronger. And there might be a point where you're not really getting much stronger, but you're still gaining weight. And that's when it's probably time to cut that surplus back.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to point out too is sometimes you can get into your own head. And if you are, let's say you're in a maintenance, or I'm sorry, you're in a deficit and you know that your calories have been cut. And so if you go into a session thinking, I'm not eating enough, I'm so tired, I'm so weak, I know that this session is not going to be good, like I'm feeling so frail and, I just need to maintain, and you kind of give yourself some slack, then you can not get the most out of your workouts, and you've kind of already planted that seed. And so, of course, if you're in a pretty big deficit and you've been there for a while, of course, we want to be making sure that we're aware of you are a little bit more injury prone. And so there are some things that you might want to pull back on like a tiny bit, but you want to kind of get that out of your head because I mean, as we've talked about in so many different episodes, is your perception of your workouts can play a huge factor into your actual performance.
Yeah, and I've seen this personally with my cut. So I always tell clients, train to progress. If we're entering a fat loss phase, I'll say you should expect to continue progressing at least through the first half, if not the whole cut, depending on how long the cut is. If someone's losing weight for 4, 6, or 8 weeks, I'm going to tell them, don't expect your training to change. You'll probably still hit PRs throughout the entire thing. It's really when you get into that 12, 16, 18, 20 week diet phase, 6 months long that you're dieting, that you might see those things start to kind of prevail. But for me, I'm starting my 5th week on my diet and my training program where my goal is to lose weight. And yesterday I hit an lifetime all-time bench PR that I've literally never hit before. So I hit 120 pounds for 4, 4, 5, and 5 reps. So 18 reps total across 4 sets. I've never done that. The most I've ever done is like a couple sets of 3 with that weight. And it was really shaky and weak. And, I'm still making strength gains. And what I've coined this as for me, for this cut, is I talk about it as fighting the deficit, and, I am in a deficit. I have lower energy availability, but my pre and post workout nutrition is great. I prioritize that. I'm hydrated. I have enough sodium. Sometimes I take a pre-workout, and my mentality towards my training is let's make sure I am still trying to get stronger. If it doesn't happen, cool, maybe I'm at that point, or maybe it's just an off day, but I'm always going to train with the intent to build and get stronger, even if I don't have quite the resources, as long as I'm doing it in a safe manner. And then maybe there will come a point where I just need to focus on maintenance or of my strength or body weight PRs. But absolutely, I've seen that with myself. And this is why I struggle to call myself an advanced trainee, even after lifting for 5 or 6 years, is because I'm still making this progress on a progressive program and sticking to it to a T, keeping all my variables in line, still seeing strength progress, still seeing gains across the board, even if I have lower energy, even if I have a little bit less calories, or a lot less calories, because my deficit is not, something to be scoffed at. So yeah, fight the deficit. Your mentality plays a much larger role than you think.
Yeah. So the next thing to talk about is muscle burn and distinguishing that between muscle pain or any sort of pain that you might feel if an exercise maybe isn't right for you, doesn't feel right, doesn't sit right. So sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to distinguish between, but normally muscle burn is felt when you're completing an exercise, is at the very end of the exercise, and you feel like your muscles just can't go any further. And so you might feel, I feel like a really good example for muscle burn is doing like a leg extension, because your quads will burn. And I feel like they start to burn like really, really quickly. They start to exhaust quickly. And so that's kind of that pain that you feel, but it isn't necessarily bad for you. And that's something that you would try to push past. And so there's a big difference between pain and muscle burn. So Marissa can probably elaborate a little bit more than me.
Yeah, I kind of like, if anything is sharp or radiating, you need to stop and reevaluate pretty much immediately. Sharp stabbing pain, things that radiate, for example, from your back to your legs or your shoulder or scapula to your arms or your neck. Those definitely you need to reevaluate your form, making sure you're doing things right and taking care of that with a professional. Then there's like muscle cramping, like we talked about. So that's like the feeling of something cramping up and you kind of lose that mobility. That's not great. You probably shouldn't try to push through that because you probably have an electrolyte issue or a muscle tightness issue at hand. So trying to loosen that up. But then the muscle burn is that buildup of metabolic waste when you're doing a set, right? You're doing the leg extension, you get to 10 reps, it starts to burn. Get to 12 reps, you feel like you are really, really struggling to keep going. You get to 15 reps and you cramp over, like not cramp, but like you like hunch over after the set because you're like, oh my gosh, like everything is burning so much. And that is something you want to try to achieve. And that's something that we chase it, we chase the pump, we chase the burn, but it is something that you have to adapt to. So someone who's brand new might feel that and be like, oh my God, what's happening? And a lot of people spend their entire training career just chasing a little bit of the burn. As soon as they start to feel something burn, they stop. And that's not where you want to stop. You want to, like Christina said, try to push through it, push past it, get as many as you can while it is burning. Those are the more effective reps in your set, actually, because you're pushing your body to adapt and to grow from receiving that stimulus. But it might not be something that you like right out the gate. I actually have a friend who, when she started training with me, she hated upper body days because she called them balloon arms. She was like, I just feel like my arms are balloons. Like everything feels swollen. Like everything feels like, there's like they're puffed up and they're burning. And she was like, I don't like it. Over time, she's realized that is the response and the adaptation that we actually want. Now she enjoys upper body training more than lower, but it just took time. It took her continuing to show up despite that and trying to develop that appreciation. So yeah, definitely sharp stabbing, radiating, go see someone, please. But like dull, achy pain, for example, like in the low back, probably has something to do with either your form or tightness in your legs, especially for lower back pain. And you don't really want your lower back to be super active in most lower body movements, unless you're doing like a rack pull or maybe a conventional deadlift. But even then, your legs should be the primary movers. And then other than that, pretty much everything, we want to go for that feeling of the muscle contracting and the buildup of your muscles burning.
Yeah. So the other kind of word I would use for an injury or when something isn't right or pain is like a pinching as well, a pinching sensation. So we did an episode with Nick Licamelli, and so he did a lot of he talked a lot about how you can kind of troubleshoot exercises, or if you are feeling pain, to kind of pinpoint where it is, or what's causing it. So I would highly recommend listening to that episode as well. But yeah, like Marissa was saying, that I think that sometimes it's like you can just tell when something doesn't feel right. And so a lot of it can actually come down to form, if you're performing an exercise incorrectly. Or the other thing too to focus on is a proper warm up. So one of the things that I used to feel was like a pinching sensation in my shoulder blade whenever I was doing a shoulder press. And when I started working with Marissa, she had me doing, I can't even remember what they're called, but when you take the over under pass throughs.
Yeah.
Yeah, pass throughs. So I started doing 2 sets of those before any upper body lift, and I've had no further pain in my shoulder blades during any sort of pressing exercises. So a simple fix. Just properly up. So again, that's something to focus on too.
Yeah. And then I think the final thing when it comes to like distinguishing pain or issues is clicking and cracking. So if something pops or clicks, like when you're going through a motion, a common one for this is leg raises for abs or a shoulder press. Typically, my rule of thumb with this is if it's something that doesn't really bother you that much, but you're just concerned if it might become a problem, typically it's just air releasing from your joints, and it's not an issue if it doesn't hurt. But if it does make you uncomfortable, then that's something to take a look at. Cracking, popping, for example, my knees are fucking loud, and excuse my French, but every time I squat, I just hear Rice Krispies, literally like snap, crackle, pop. It is pretty disgusting. And like, honestly, sometimes I get concerned just because I'm like, I feel like they just shouldn't be cracking this much at my age, but it is what it is. So that again is air releasing from the joints. There's nothing right now that makes me believe that that's going to become an issue. But if it's something that really bothers you, maybe doing something like a knee sleeve, if your knees crack a lot, can help with like just alleviating you actually feeling it. Or just doing a good warm up and maybe avoiding movements that really exacerbate it if it is uncomfortable. But typically if something pops or cracks or makes a little bit of noise, not typically an issue. Another one I had a client say was like when she did a shoulder press with a barbell, she felt her shoulders pop at the bottom. And I took a look at a video of her form, and this is where videos can be very helpful, and you can troubleshoot training by checking form that way. But she was coming all the way down to like touching her sternum with the bar and then all the way up. So I told her like, hey, just cut the range of motion to like your chin or your nose, and it solved the problem immediately. So sometimes going through too large of a range of motion could exacerbate something like that, where like it's just not necessary to go through that far, right? So just kind of troubleshooting with video and feedback from someone who's reputable or experienced too.
Yeah. So then I think that's a nice transition into, if you have a pulled muscle, or if you have a strain, or if you have an injury. So Marissa's talked about this lots of times, where she knows that she's got lower back issues. And so there might come a time when she goes into a training session and she starts to do an exercise, and she just knows, you know what, this is not a good day to squat heavy, or this, I can just kind of feel that something is not right. Something's just not feeling good. And so that's a time where she can kind of auto regulate and just switch to something else. And maybe she's like, you know what, this was supposed to be a strength based workout, but I'm going to switch to more of a volume based workout. Or it's okay. And not every single session is going to be your day. Not every single session you're going to feel at your best. And it is okay to switch up your workouts if you are scared of injuring yourself or making something a lot worse than it already is.
Yeah, or just like dialing back or moving something around. So that's actually a really great example for what happened yesterday. So I came back from out of town, just like 2.5 hours away on Sunday. So spent 2.5 hours sitting in the car. My hips got kind of tight. And then I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon, like basically meal prepping, shopping. I was on my feet all day. I was moving. I didn't get a chance to sit down and stretch my hips. Typically, I train lower body on Mondays. However, this past weekend, I trained legs really hard on Saturday. Came home Sunday, everything kind of tightened up, didn't stretch. Monday rolled around, had a really busy work day. Again, didn't stretch on my lunch break or anything like that. Like just was really sedentary and my hips were tight. So I was like, do I stick to the plan no matter what, PR or ER, or do I, switch my push day and my leg day just to give myself a day to stretch, relax, open those hips up, and recover a little bit more from Saturday's workout. So I ended up doing that. And so that way I don't have to sacrifice, for example, if I had gone in and said, okay, I'm still going to do leg day, I might have down regulated the weight that I used to just make sure that I wasn't doing anything stupid. And that would have been fine to do. But personally for me, it made more sense to give myself a shot at progressing on all my lifts this week, rather than kind of taking that hit and feeling a little disappointed with myself for not, hitting a volume PR or adding weight or something like that. So just giving myself that extra day. And I also have a client who we've been working really hard to get her squat and her bench up. And there have been a couple of weeks in a row now where she's had to kind of dial the weight back. She hit a nice PR, but now she's been dealing with some anxiety and some personal issues, and it's been affecting her training. So she'll send me some videos of her trying, the same weight that we were using prior, but now with all of this pent up anxiety and angst, it's actually affecting her ability to like really focus. And so we've had the discussion too of like, hey, this is like a learning experience where you need to know when to acknowledge it's time to take a step down in weight because of how you're feeling going into this training session. Or if you try the first rep and it's just not happening the way that it should feel, it's okay to dial back if it's just not your day, because there's going to be days in the future where you do have those highs and those PRs, but we have to know when to scale back so that we do stay injury free. And just overall, like my general rule of thumb with that is if it's not your day, strength's not there, didn't get sleep, bad nutrition, and you're just, you're getting your session in anyways, get the volume in, right? So if you need to go down 10 pounds to hit the right rep range, I would prefer you do that than use the same weight that's programmed and get a bunch of like less shitty reps in, right? And so I would always prefer someone just getting the volume in and, auto regulating the weight rather than the other way around from like an injury prevention perspective. I don't know if your recommendations would be different or the same. I'm going to guess probably the same because we do everything the freaking same, but, that's kind of where I would go with that, and teaching clients and teaching you guys listening, it's okay to cut it down if it's just not your day, and you need to be able to have that skill to make that call.
With that being said, I think there's, sorry, my dog thinks that there's someone at the door. There's a big difference between going into a session and thinking like, I'm going to hurt myself or my strength isn't there, versus going in and saying like, I don't want to do this. Because there are times where you might like not feel great, like you might not have the energy, and you're looking at heavy squats and you're just like, man, I just don't want to do this today. And then you can be like, well, I can just auto regulate and hit volume, and it should be the same. So there's a really big difference between those two things. So sometimes it takes a lot of introspection and really like looking and saying like, okay, am I worried about injury, or am I not wanting to do this because I don't feel great? So trying to have those tough and honest conversations with yourself and kind of figure out where you need to go from there.
Oh my God, that's literally my yesterday experience again. Like I almost just stayed home. Like I really didn't want to train, really exhausted after I finished my work day, which went for like an extra hour. And it was just a really long day. I was really tired. I was like, maybe I could just go for a walk. It's nice out, active recovery day, like maybe something like that. And then my boyfriend and I have this joke while we're cutting right now. We like yell this at each other whenever we're like not motivated. We go, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels, or nothing is worth like nothing is more worth than this. So like he was like, never miss a Monday. And I was like, got it. we're going to go. So I drug my ass there and I was like, I know that I'm recovered enough to do one of my sessions. I just have to figure out which one it's going to be. So I was kind of in that exact situation where I got to the gym and I was like, holy crap, I don't want to be here. And I sat down, my notebook, started writing out my lift when I got there. And I told myself, this is a mental test. This is building character. This is building mental strength and toughness for when I'm really going to need it, when I'm contest prepping in, a year and a half from now. So I use that long-term goal to really drive me towards like using discipline on the days that I really need it. So that's like a perfect, like, I mean, the example you gave is literally what happened to me yesterday and what I did to overcome that. Usually by the time too, I will say, ooh, this is really good. And I'm going to probably finish on this, but I try to give myself what's called the 20-minute rule. So typically I will, if I'm really feeling that way, I say, okay, I'm going to get to the gym. I'm going to do whatever I need to do for 20 minutes. And if I want to go home after I do what I need to do for 20 minutes, then I'll let myself go home. Maybe it's really just not my day. I tell my clients to do this as well, the 20-minute rule. Typically what happens is by the time you've gotten 20 minutes in, you're already, a little bit more awake, a little bit more alert. You're probably, getting into the workout. And then you just think, okay, well, I might as well just finish, right? Like what's another 20 minutes or 30 minutes on top of this? So that was definitely something that I used, continue to use, have my clients use, and just, getting yourself in, getting started. And then typically you're able to finish out.
Yeah, I like the 20-minute rule. I've never not heard of that, but I've never had that strategy before, but I really like it because I think a lot of people can relate to that because I mean, going to the gym takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of mental like fortitude to get to the gym. And a lot of times like it's easier to sit on your couch, watch Netflix. Yes, I'm continue watching and not have to get up and go anywhere. It's a lot easier and you're more comfortable on the couch and getting up and going. It's like you're just the whole time you're on the way there, like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And then usually what happens for me is I get there, I start warming up and I'm like, I'm really glad I came, like, because I love this. But even Marissa and I, as coaches, as people who've been lifting for a really long time, I mean, we still have to fight ourselves to go to the gym. So a lot of times it's discipline over motivation. Like a lot of the times we're not super motivated. And one of the things I kind of liked when I was working in the schools is I had a lunch break or I had a very specific time that I had to get my lift in. And if I did not go at that moment, then that lift was not happening for the day. So it forced me to go to the gym and lift during that time. And I still love it and I love doing it, but it was just like being forced to do it was a lot easier because sometimes I'll find myself on days where I'm a completely off day. I might be like, okay, well, I'm going to do client check-ins. I'm going to meal prep. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. And then next thing you know, it's like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And I don't really like lifting at that time because I'm like, oh crap. So sometimes it's just nice to have that time already carved out into your schedule, and so it forces you to go.
Yeah. And like that whole thing with like, you never regret it. You never regret a workout, as cliche as that is. And for me yesterday too, because it's just such a good example. I was so tired that I made Aaron drive us to the gym in my car because I have the commuter car. So we always take it like for things that require a lot of distance. But I literally was like, you're driving my car. I can't, I will probably get like spacey. I'm tired, I'm sleepy. And so I got there as soon as I was like 4 sets into my workout. I was peppy. I was jumping around. I was dancing. I was happy. But like, it just took getting into it to like feel good again. So a lot of times training can make you more alert, make you feel better afterwards, especially. So definitely agree with that. I also agree with having a routine and having a system put in place so that you have these appointments throughout your week that that's your time, right? Like that's your time to lift. You have to go do it then. And that's your routine. The less sporadic your schedule is and the more you're able to nail down a routine instead of saying, oh, it's Monday, I don't want to lift today, so I'm just going to push it off till tomorrow. Make designated days for your training. I train on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. if that's your schedule and you don't deviate from it, obviously not every now and then you're going to need to flip flop a little bit, but most of the time, if that's your designated schedule, it's going to help you a lot with just sticking to your plan.
And same thing with actually picking a specific workout time. So if you like to work out at 11 or 12 in that morning, afternoon, your body starts to get acclimated to that time frame and knows that, okay, around this time I need to start preparing for a workout session because this is part of my schedule. This is what I'm used to. So sometimes that can be really helpful as well.
Okay, this is my last thing, and then we're gonna wrap this up. But it's funny because I'm in a strength and conditioning class for my master's right now, and I'm doing an article review project with a partner. The article we're reviewing is the effect of training at the same time of day as a designated performance that you have to do, and its effect on your habituation to that training time of day, and your performance will essentially increase proportionally for that specific time, compared to, for example, if you train in the morning and then your competition's in the morning, you'll be better adapted than someone who trains in the evening then competes in the morning. That's an actual, tangible, scientifically found effect. So pretty cool. Maybe I'll link that, have Shane link that in the show notes.
Yeah. So to wrap up, because I think this turned out to be a lot longer of an episode than we originally thought, but kind of glad that we did 2 separate episodes on pre-workout nutrition and then also how to troubleshoot your training. So hopefully you guys got a lot out of this episode and you have some takeaways to improve your training. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find both of us on Instagram. You can find me at Christy Lynn Fit and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. And thank you guys so much for listening. And we hope to see you back next week.